Detective James Harding stood alone in the dusty evidence room, staring at a cardboard box labeled Ramsey Recordings that everyone else had written off as worthless. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting uneven shadows across the metal shelving units that lined the walls. His fingers traced the faded label, smudging years of accumulated dust. The box wasn't particularly heavy, but something about it felt weighted with unspoken significance. Everyone knew the story, a once-respected detective who'd slowly unraveled while investigating a string of disappearances in Millbrook. The official narrative painted Ramsey as a cautionary tale, an officer who'd become obsessed, eventually suffering a complete mental breakdown when he couldn't solve his cases. Chief Roberts had made it clear that morning. Anything older than 5 years without an active case connection was to be archived or discarded, especially the Ramsey materials that should have been thrown out years ago. But as Harding lifted the lid, something about the contents gave him pause. Inside weren't haphazard notes or disorganized ravings. Instead, he found meticulously labeled cassette tapes, each dated and cataloged in Ramsey's precise handwriting. Small index cards separated the recordings into categories: locations, individuals, dates. This was methodical, deliberate documentation. Harding checked his watch, almost 7, and he'd promised himself he'd leave by 6. With a resigned sigh, he closed the box and tucked it under his arm. He'd take it home, listen to one tape out of curiosity, then dispose of the whole collection tomorrow. At home, Harding poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and selected a tape labeled Town Square Observations, March 12, 1998. He slotted it into an old cassette player, expecting mundane observations. The tape crackled to life with Ramsey's voice, steady and professional. Thursday, 10:17 a.m. Martha Wilson just left the pharmacy, 3rd time this week. Mayor's car parked outside the Lakeside Diner again, meeting with the same group as Tuesday. Harding's attention began to wander when the recording took an unexpected turn. Subject of interest arriving tomorrow. James Harding, 32, transferring from Chicago PD. Divorced, no children. History of exceptional case closure rate, particularly in missing persons. Family connection makes him ideal. They'll position him to take my place when they finally move against me. The whiskey glass slipped from Harding's fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. He stared at the cassette player, blood running cold. The recording was dated 15 years before he'd ever set foot in Millbrook, before he'd even considered leaving Chicago. How could Ramsey have known his name, his age, his divorce? He rewound the tape, listening again, heart pounding against his ribs. Ramsey's voice continued, describing details of Harding's life that were impossible for anyone to know. The scar on his left shoulder from a childhood accident, his habit of drinking black coffee with 2 sugars, even the nightmares about drowning that had plagued him since youth. With trembling hands, Harding rummaged through the box, pulling out tape after tape. He grabbed a notepad and began jotting down names, working through the night. By dawn, his living room walls were covered with notes, a chaotic constellation of information. On the 3rd day, the pattern emerged. Harding cross-referenced the names from Ramsey's recordings with the town's missing persons cases. Timothy Marshall, mentioned in a recording from 1999 as showing signs of awareness, reported missing in 2001. Rebecca Collins, described as asking questions about the lake house in a 2003 tape, disappeared in 2005. Emily Jang, noted as witnessing the gathering in 2007, vanished in 2010. Person after person mentioned in Ramsey's recordings subsequently disappeared within years of being discussed. Some cases were unsolved, others explained away as relocations or runaways, but the pattern was undeniable. Harding sank into his couch, head in his hands. No explanation could account for the recording that mentioned him. Details of his life from a time when he had no connection to Millbrook whatsoever. These weren't predictions or paranoid fantasies. They were documentation of something happening in this town, something connected to dozens of disappearances over decades. The unmarked cassette slipped between Harding's trembling fingers as he inserted it into the player. With each new recording, the boundaries between paranoia and reality seemed to blur further. The cassette's soft hiss gave way to a woman's voice, barely audible above a whisper. "They're watching me now. They know I've seen them at the lake house." The voice sent an immediate chill spiraling down Harding's spine. raising goosebumps along his arms as the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He knew it intimately from hours spent reviewing interview tapes during his first month in Millbrook. Sandra Mercer, 32, avid hiker, elementary school teacher, who vanished without a trace 3 years ago after filing a police report about strange lights near Lake Millbrook. Her case had been his introduction to the town's peculiar history with missing persons. "I wasn't supposed to be there that night," Sandra's voice continued, thin with fear, but determined. "I was collecting water samples for my class project when I saw them gathering at the boathouse. Judge Phillips was there, and Dr. Winters. They were wearing these red robes with symbols I couldn't make out. There were others too, faces I recognized from around town." Her words hung in the air, each syllable weighted with the terror of someone who knew she was marked. Harding's skin prickled. Judge Phillips still presided over the county courthouse. Dr. Winters remained the town's most respected physician. Both were pillars of the community, their photographs adorning the Millbrook Leaders' Wall in the town hall. Sandra's voice described what appeared to be some kind of ceremony, with participants arranged in a circle around a stone altar that hadn't been there the week before. Something in the background of the recording caught Harding's attention, a rhythmic sound beneath Sandra's frightened whispers. He adjusted the audio levels, boosting certain frequencies while dampening others. The background noise clarified into what sounded like synchronized chanting, words in a language he couldn't identify. Harding grabbed a notepad and began jotting down every location Sandra mentioned: the lake house, a clearing in the North Woods, an abandoned limestone quarry, and something she called the Elder Stones on Miller's Ridge. When he plotted these points on a map of Millbrook, his breath caught. With startling clarity, he saw the pattern emerge. The locations formed a perfect pentagram across the landscape, with Lake Millbrook at its center. Morning found Harding in the basement archives of the Millbrook Gazette, surrounded by years of yellowing newspapers. His eyes burned from hours of scanning microfiche. The pattern was undeniable. Similar disappearances stretching back 50 years, clustering around the same 5 locations Sandra had mentioned. The recordings contained specific details about the missing that had never appeared in police reports or newspaper articles. Sandra's tape mentioned that Diane Fulton had been painting symbols from her dreams before she disappeared, a detail Harding confirmed when he located Fulton's sister, who still had one such painting hidden in her attic. "I never told the police about the paintings," Mrs. Carlton said, her hands shaking as she handed Harding a canvas covered in spiraling symbols. "They seemed so strange, and I didn't think they mattered." The symbols matched those described in Sandra's recording, made years after Fulton had vanished. These weren't coincidences. They were methodical documentation of something sinister happening in Millbrook for generations. The third tape contained the most disturbing evidence yet. Labeled only with a black X, it captured what sounded like a ritual in progress. When he took the enhanced audio to Professor Levin, the linguistics expert's face drained of color. "This is a corrupted form of Proto-Germanic," she whispered. "These are binding words, detective. Words meant to trap something, or someone." Hiking through the locations on his map, Harding discovered ancient symbols carved into trees surrounding each disappearance site. These recordings were documentation of sacrifices. Each victim had witnessed something they shouldn't have. The town's prosperity suddenly took on a sinister cast. As Harding stared at the tree carvings, his mind raced with questions about Detective Ramsey. How had his predecessor obtained these recordings? Why hadn't he brought this evidence forward officially? And most importantly, what had happened to silence him? Those questions pounded in Harding's skull as he reluctantly shared his findings with Chief Morris the next morning. Within hours he found himself summoned to the mayor's office, though he couldn't recall anyone informing the mayor of his investigation. What truly unnerved him was the way Mayor Wilson's perfect political smile never touched those cold, calculating eyes that seemed to already know every detail Harding had discovered. "I think it's time we put these old cases to rest, Detective," Mayor Wilson said, leaning back in his leather chair, morning light streaming through tall windows behind him. The office exuded old money and power, dark wood paneling, leather-bound volumes, and photographs of Wilson with governors and senators. Harding's gaze settled on a collection of Native American artifacts displayed behind the mayor's desk. A ceremonial copper bowl caught his attention, identical to one Sandra Mercer had described in her recording about the ritual she witnessed. His pulse quickened. The bowl hadn't been mentioned in any official report. "Chief Morris tells me you've been resourceful with Detective Ramsey's materials," the mayor continued, fingers tapping rhythmically on his desk, connecting those disappearances to locations around our town. Harding's blood ran cold. He'd never told Chief Morris about the locations forming a pattern. That information remained in his private notes at home. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir," Harding replied carefully. "I've just been reviewing old case files." Mayor Wilson chuckled, the sound hollow and practiced. "The pentagram pattern? The tree carvings at Miller's Ridge? The connection to Lake Millbrook? Your investigation is commendable but ultimately unnecessary." As the mayor spoke, Harding noticed a heavy silver ring on Wilson's right hand featuring an unusual design. A circle containing intersecting lines forming a stylized eye. The exact ring Sandra had described worn by one of the figures at the lakeside ritual. Millbrook has the lowest crime rate in the county. Our unemployment numbers are half the state average. Property values continue to rise while neighboring towns struggle. The mayor leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Do you think that happens by accident? Some things are better left undisturbed." Sunlight glinted off the mayor's ring as he reached for a folder. Inside was paperwork for a promotion to lieutenant, a full rank above Harding's current position, with a 40% salary increase. "Your talents would be better utilized supervising our new community outreach program rather than chasing ghosts from old recordings," Wilson said. "All I need are those tapes and any notes you've compiled. For proper archiving, of course." On the bookshelf behind the mayor sat a small carved wooden box with distinctive spiral patterns, another item Sandra had described. Beside it, a photograph showed a younger Mayor Wilson standing at Lake Millbrook with several men, their faces partially obscured by shadows. "I understand, sir," Harding said, accepting the folder. "I'll gather everything for you by tomorrow." "Excellent. We have such a special community here in Millbrook, it would be a shame to disrupt that with unsubstantiated theories." As the mayor reached across to shake Harding's hand, his sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a tattoo of concentric circles surrounding ancient symbols, matching patterns from the tree carvings Harding had documented. "One more thing," Mayor Wilson called, as Harding reached the door. "That last recording you found, the one Ramsey made at the old quarry? I'd be particularly interested in hearing that one first." Harding froze. He'd never mentioned a recording from the quarry to anyone. It was among the tapes he hadn't yet listened to. The drive home was a blur of paranoia. Inside his house, everything appeared untouched at first glance, but Harding caught the subtle signs. The desk drawer closed differently, the couch cushions not quite right. The tapes in his closet were still there, but several were missing, including the ones he hadn't yet listened to. His notebook had been flipped through. On his kitchen table lay a business card from Mayor Wilson with a handwritten note. "Looking forward to our continued cooperation." Beside it, a small carved wooden figure, identical to those found at each disappearance site over the decades. The wooden figure clattered to the floor as Harding's phone rang, shattering the tense silence of his apartment. But it wasn't the call that froze the blood in his veins, it was what had just slipped from between two cassette tapes. A photograph, worn at the edges and yellowed with age, showing a young woman with his unmistakable eyes standing beside a much younger Detective Ramsey. The family resemblance was undeniable, those same deep-set eyes that stared back at him from the mirror each morning. His phone continued its insistent ring, but Harding couldn't tear his gaze from the photograph. The woman wore a police department visitor badge, her expression serious but determined. On the back, faded handwriting. "Elizabeth and me, first day on Millbrook case, 1992. Elizabeth." A name absent from every family story. With trembling fingers, Harding silenced his phone and inserted the tape labeled Elizabeth Harding, Interview 1, March 1992. The cassette player whirred to life, and Ramsey's voice, younger and less weary, filled the room. Ramsey, or VO, interview with Elizabeth Harding, journalist investigating disappearances in Millbrook and surrounding counties. March 15, 1992. Elizabeth Harding, VO. I've tracked 7 cases so far, all following the same pattern. People who ask too many questions, who notice things others pretended not to see. Harding sank into his chair, memories washing over him. His father's reluctance to discuss family history, the way conversations about relatives always seemed carefully edited. Elizabeth Harding. The surname felt like an electric shock. He checked his watch, nearly midnight, but dialed his father's number anyway. After 4 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Harding, VO." "Dad," Harding said tightly. "Who is Elizabeth Harding?" The silence stretched so long that Harding thought the connection had dropped. "Harding's father, VO." "How did you find out about her?" "Harding, VO." "Answer the question." A heavy sigh. "Harding's father, VO." "Your mother's sister, my sister-in-law, Harding, VO." "And you never mentioned I had an aunt?" "Harding's father, V." "Oh. She disappeared before you were born. It broke your mother. We agreed never to speak of Elizabeth again." "Harding, VO. Where did she disappear?" "Harding's father, VO. A town called Millbrook." Harding's fingers tightened around the phone. "Harding, VO. The same town I was transferred to 3 years ago. Harding's father, VO. Yes, Harding, VO. That wasn't a coincidence, was it? Harding's father, VO. No, a man contacted me. Said you were the right detective for a job that needed finishing." Ending the call with a promise to call back, Harding turned to the remaining tapes with new understanding. Their organization wasn't random, it was a message. He arranged them by date, noticing gaps in the sequence forming what looked like coordinates. In the 4th tape, Ramsey's voice turned eerily prescient. "Ramsey, VO. If something happens to us, I've made arrangements. Your nephew, he has your instincts. One day he'll come to Millbrook. Elizabeth Harding, VO. My nephew? James is just a child. Ramsey, VO. He won't always be. And he'll need to know what we discovered." Each revelation hit harder than the last. Elizabeth had documented the same pattern of disappearances 30 years earlier. Her notes identified several town officials involved in what she called ceremonial abductions, including a young councilman named Wilson. By dawn, Harding had decoded the message hidden in the tape sequence, coordinates pointing to a location outside town and a date tomorrow, 30 years to the day after Elizabeth's final recording. The last tape, unlabeled and hidden in a hollowed book, contained Ramsey's final message. "Ramsey, VO, James, they got to me too." Elizabeth discovered something at the quarry, documentation going back centuries. This town was established by a cult. Their prosperity comes at a price, sacrifices of people with the sight. Elizabeth had it, and if you're hearing my voice, you have it too. Studying his map of disappearances, Harding saw the terrifying truth. At the center of the pentagram, his own apartment building, he wasn't brought to Millbrook to solve the case. He was brought as the next sacrifice. The morning light spilled across Harding's kitchen table, illuminating his scattered notes and the terrible truth they revealed. His hand still trembled from the night's discoveries when a folded piece of paper slid under his door, bearing 5 simple words that would shatter everything he thought he knew about Millbrook's power structure. "Not everyone is against you." The note struck him like an electric current. His police instincts took over as he scanned his apartment, processing the implications. Someone knew what he was investigating, and was reaching out. Hours later, Harding found himself at Millbrook Public Library, watching Mrs. Grayson at the circulation desk. The elderly librarian, who'd been a fixture in town for over 40 years, organized returned books with methodical precision. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun, reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. When she looked up, her steel blue eyes assessed him with unexpected sharpness before sliding a note across the polished counter. "Mrs. Grayson, VO. Some of us have been waiting for someone to listen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Harding, VO." "How did you know I'd come?" Harding asked, pocketing the note. A thin smile crossed her face. "Mrs. Grayson, VO. We've been watching you since you arrived, just as we watched Ramsey, and Elizabeth before him." She tapped her watch. "Return at closing time. Staff entrance." That evening, Harding slipped through the rear door to find Mrs. Grayson waiting with 4 others. Walter Fleming, the retired chemistry teacher whose family had been in Millbrook for generations. Dr. Abigail Chen, who ran the free clinic despite persistent funding challenges. Thomas Rivera, whose hardware store had survived when chain retailers forced other local shops to close. And Sarah Winters, a young server whose watchful eyes suggested she noticed far more than customers realized. "We call ourselves the Witnesses," Mrs. Grayson explained, leading them through a hidden door behind a bookshelf in the basement. "We've been documenting Millbrook's secrets for generations." The room they entered was small but meticulously organized with filing cabinets and a complex web of evidence on the walls, photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes connected by colored string. My grandfather started keeping records in 1946. He documented how Millbrook prospered during regional droughts and economic downturns, Walter chimed in. I've documented unusual markings on town officials, scarring patterns identical to ancient burial rituals. The pattern suggests 37 active participants, Dr. Chen added. That covers every position of authority in Millbrook, Harding observed. Everyone with influence, Mrs. Grayson clarified. Anyone who shapes public opinion. I found sealed tunnels during renovations at Town Hall. They connect the courthouse, Town Hall, Historical Society, hospital, school administration, and... Thomas started. Lake Millbrook, Harding finished, recognizing the pattern from his pentagram map. Did you explore them? Started to. Heard chanting inside. When my foreman filed a report about it, he disappeared that weekend, Thomas replied. We've learned to be careful, Dr. Chen explained. Those who speak openly tend to vanish next. How many of you are there? Harding asked. 12 active members, Mrs. Grayson answered. Plus perhaps 20 others who help indirectly, people who've lost someone and suspect the truth. Sarah handed Harding a thumb drive with digitized evidence, while Walter retrieved a weathered map. Ramsey gave this to my father before his breakdown. It leads to a cabin where he kept his most damning evidence, Walter said. Why show me all this now? Harding asked. Why not when I first arrived? Mrs. Grayson's expression softened. We needed to be sure. Others came before you, investigators who seemed genuine until they weren't. She met his gaze directly, but none had what you have. The sight, Dr. Chen said quietly, like your Aunt Elizabeth had, the ability to sense what others can't. The realization struck Harding. That's why they brought me here. I'm part of the case, Harding concluded. Rain began to fall as Harding navigated his vehicle through the dense forest each mile, taking him further from civilization and closer to the truth. The cabin that held Ramsey's most protected secrets stood somewhere in these woods, a final testament from a man the town had branded as mentally unstable. The witness's map guided him down overgrown paths where tire tracks hadn't disturbed the forest floor in years. The cabin appeared suddenly, a weathered structure with pine needles carpeting its slanted roof and wild vines embracing the walls. Harding approached cautiously, hand resting on his holster. The porch steps groaned under his weight as he pushed open the door, releasing the musty scent of abandonment. What greeted him was the methodical workspace of someone desperately preserving their sanity. Every wall disappeared beneath layers of documentation, photographs pinned beside newspaper clippings, connected by red yarn mapping relationships no one else had seen. My God, Ramsey, Harding whispered, surveying the meticulous work. He approached a central table where professional-grade recording equipment sat beneath a thin layer of dust, sophisticated directional microphones and frequency analyzers. Beside it lay surveillance photographs capturing town officials at midnight lake gatherings. Mayor Wilson stood in ceremonial robes, arms raised toward the moonlit sky, while judges, doctors, and business leaders formed a circle around what appeared to be an altar stone. A leather-bound journal rested nearby. Harding opened it carefully, finding Ramsey's neat handwriting spanning 15 years, beginning with an entry that chilled him. They approached me today, invited me to join Millbrook's True Governance. I've suspected something operated beneath the town's surface. Now I have confirmation. I'll accept their invitation. The only way to gather evidence of what happens to the people who disappear, Ramsey's voice echoed in his mind. The journal detailed Ramsey's infiltration of the inner circle, participating in preliminary rituals while concealing recording devices throughout key locations. He discovered the town's prosperity came through calculated sacrifice. The recordings aren't predictions, Harding murmured, realization washing over him. They're planning sessions. Each disappearance was orchestrated months in advance. The town's elite identified those with the sight, people sensitive to the energy beneath Millbrook who might eventually sense the darkness at its core. These individuals were monitored, discussed in meetings Ramsey recorded, and eventually taken during ceremonies. Ramsey's final entries grew increasingly paranoid as he suspected others doubted his commitment. He described hiding duplicate evidence throughout the cabin as insurance. They're watching me now, the final entry read. If you're reading this, you found what I couldn't reveal publicly. The recording in the floor safe contains everything. Their full confession, the purpose, everyone involved. Be more careful than I was. Harding found a small rug concealing a floor safe. After trying combinations from the journal, it clicked open, revealing a cassette tape labeled, "Final Evidence, Millbrook Confession." He inserted the tape and pressed play. Static gave way to Ramsey's voice, calm but urgent. "This will be my final recording. What follows is my interview with Councilman Phillips, who explains everything in exchange for protection." Phillips's trembling voice emerged. "The founders discovered something beneath the lake, something that demands payment but gives prosperity in return. The original families made a pact, sacrificed those who could sense its presence, and the town would thrive while others failed." Phillips detailed how they selected victims, those with the ability to sense what others couldn't. Harding felt recognition dawn. His Aunt Elizabeth, Detective Ramsey, himself. All drawn to Millbrook because they felt what others couldn't, all perfect sacrifices. The recording continued with revelations about maintaining power through generations, ensuring the town's prosperity through calculated offerings. Each piece fell into place, explaining Millbrook's economic stability and unnatural success. Harding leaned forward, absorbed in the truth he'd sought, when sounds from outside pierced his concentration. Car doors slamming, multiple vehicles, footsteps approaching through the underbrush. The sound of car doors slamming jolted Harding back to reality. His fingers trembled as he pressed play on Ramsey's final recording. Councilman Phillips' voice filled the cabin with chilling clarity. "Those with the sight must be sacrificed." "The hunger beneath Lake Millbrook grows stronger each year," Phillips's voice echoed. Harding stared at the photographs on the wall, his Aunt Ramsey and himself, all marked by the same cursed gift. The weight of their unfinished work crushed his resolve. Footsteps crunched through fallen leaves outside. Clutching the evidence, terror and determination warred within him. The moment of choice had arrived. Would the truth die with him, or finally break free?